Hello BookTube, Sarah here, and welcome to my channel. Today I'm coming to you with my weekly reviews for August I think it was the 3rd to the 10th. So this is actually 8 days as opposed to 7 days. So I knew I'd want to do this for a few weeks, but it just so happened that it worked out this weekend. I'm actually switching my reviews to run Sunday through Saturday as opposed to Saturday through Friday. I know it's not a big deal. It just means you're not going to get the video now on Saturdays. You're going to get it on Sundays, because I was realizing, and I'm looking and I'm like, you guys are getting a video from me on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and then Tuesday. So it was just kind of like, Tuesday seemed to be the odd one out. Yeah, so instead now it's going to be Sundays, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays. So it's not a big deal at all. It just seems to work better for me when I look at, a week. When you look at a calendar, they usually run Sunday through Saturday. So anyway, long explanation for something that probably isn't that big a deal. Yesterday was a terribly busy day for me, and in future my goal is to actually get these videos recorded on Saturday afternoons as opposed to Sunday afternoon, which is what I'm doing today. But yesterday was ridiculously busy. I was out from about 9:30 in the morning and I didn't get home. I got home briefly at about 10 o'clock and then I had to turn back around and pick up Garrett, so I didn't actually get home till like 11 o'clock at night. So it was a long day out yesterday, but that's okay. That's what Saturdays tend to be, are busy. But anyway, long story short, here we are. I finished 8 books this week, and yeah, so let me go ahead and talk about them for you guys. So the first book I finished was Do You Want to Start a Scandal by Tessa. This is a historical romance novel. It's book number 4 in the Castles Ever After series, but book number 5 in the Spindle Cove series. So, I think this is more part of the Spindle Cove series than the Castles Ever After. It is the final book in the Castles Ever After series, so that's one that I've now finished. Yay to finishing a series. But I think it was Karen from Rather Be Reading mentioned the fact that it ties more into the Spindle Cove, and now that I've read book number 5, I might be slightly spoiled for the books that came before it, but that's fine. That doesn't bother me. It looks like it'd be a fun series, and I'm looking forward to reading the rest of them. I listened to this on audio, and it was narrated by Carmen Rose, who does a really great job. This was originally published in 2016, average rating of 4.08 stars on Goodreads, and I gave it 4 stars. So I like this one. It was an interesting enough story. It's about this girl who does not come from a great, her family doesn't have a lot of great wealth, let's put it that way. And her mother's trying to marry her off, and she has her sights set on this duke. And she kind of comes to him at the very beginning of the book. They're at some sort of a party, and she corners him in this library, and she's like, excuse me, my mom's going to try and set us up, but don't worry about it. I'm not interested in you. There's quite an age difference between the two of them. And then this other couple ends up coming into the room. So the two of them hide because they can't be seen in public, like in private together, just the two of them. And this other couple that comes in that they don't know who it is end up having this tryst on the library desk, and they hear the whole thing. So then one thing leads to another, and this little boy who's like heir to this, he's the son of, I guess, maybe a baron or a duke or somebody very high ranking. He's only like 7 or 8 years old, and he ends up hearing what's happening in the library, which is right below his bedroom. Well, he comes in, and our main character, Charlotte, and Pierce are our two leads in this book. They're in this room together, and he's calling murder, murder. He was trying to murder her. And they're like, well, what did you hear? And he starts making all these horrible, like, very adult noises. And, everybody's kind of like, oh my gosh. So they assume it's Charlotte and Pierce. So, of course, now, a marriage kind of has to take place. And the story goes from there. Hence the title, Do You Want to Start a Scandal? So Charlotte kind of spends a lot of the book looking for who the actual people are. And Pierce is trying to win her over. It was a really cute story, really sweet. I didn't like it quite as much as the book prior, the book that was set in the Scottish Highlands. I liked that one far better, but this one was still really enjoyable. And like I said, I am looking forward to reading the rest of the Spindle Cove series. But the one character that stood out for me in this entire book was the little boy. His name is Edmund, and he was so funny. He was, he's just trying to be an adult. Like, he's trying to be grown up, you know what I mean? And he keeps, like, tracking Piers around the house, calling him a murderer. And there's a great scene where the two of them are like jousting with pool cues. The little boy doesn't get hurt, obviously, but you know, he's kind of setting traps for Pierce to try and catch him because he thinks he's a killer, and of course he doesn't understand what happens between adults and things like this. Really, really funny. He was by far my favorite character in the book, and this one was really enjoyable. The next one that I finished, not so enjoyable unfortunately, was The Groom Came Back by Abby Gaines. This is a contemporary romance novel. It is Harlequin Super Romance number 1539. This was originally published in 2009. Average rating of 3.50 stars on Goodreads. I gave it 3.5 stars. This one I read for Romanceopoly for the library square. So the you know, reader's choice square, if you will. And this one I had on my TBR. Now it looks at on the cover as if there's a label there saying that it's part of a series, the Going Back series. I looked it up, and this isn't a numbered series. It's not a series you need to read in order. I've mentioned these kind of series before that Harlequin does, that like The Count on a Cop or A Fatherhood. They're just all about this kind of a thing where it's a second chance romance, essentially. So in this one, I was confused in this one, and that's what dropped the star rating for me. That the whole premise of the story, our main characters are Callie and Jack. And when she was 17 and he was 26, they got married with her mother's consent, because her mother was dying, and she, because she was still only 17, very close to 18, but still only 17, would have been put in the foster care system. And she wanted her to stay with her very good friend, her good friend and her husband, who was Jack's parents. So they did this fake wedding, and then Callie could move in with his parents, and he actually headed off to Oxford University to become a doctor. And 7 or 8 years have now passed, and now he's back because he's looking to get a divorce. There was never any consummation of the marriage or anything at all like that, so it wasn't anything that, you know, statutory or, you know, so don't think it went there. Although it did tread the line very, very close in my opinion. But I guess they had to make her 17 in order to make the plot work. So the two of them haven't seen each other in forever. She's obviously grown up quite a bit in the last 8 years, and what I really didn't like is that he came off as such a jerk the entire book. He just had this major attitude, and he didn't, you know, he thought his parents are fine, they don't need me around. And Callie's like, you know, they were struggling because his sister passed away the same year that him and Callie got married. So even 8 years later, his mother is still dealing with it, or his father just wants the mother to get over it in a way, like not get over it and forget her, but move on with your life kind of an idea. And she's obviously suffering from depression. So there were a lot of like heavy topics in this book, but the whole marriage thing is what threw me for a loop, because I could have sworn right from the beginning of the book that Jack's parents knew about this marriage. And then like in the last like 10% of the book, when, you know, the truth is revealed that these two have been kind of seeing each other, you know, having a relationship of sorts. And, you know, then Jack announces that, oh yeah, we're actually married. His parents are surprised. They didn't know. And I'm thinking, I could have sworn, maybe it was the writing, maybe it was just me. I don't know. I didn't love this one. I wanted to like it because I thought the plot line was really, really interesting. But as I said, Jack just came off being a major jerk, and I just was very, very confused about who knew and who didn't know about this whole marriage. I don't want to say it was a fake marriage, because it was a legal marriage, but who knew about it and who didn't. And yeah, I didn't love it, unfortunately. The next one that I finished, another one that I didn't particularly love, was The Once and Future Prince by Olivia Gaines, another contemporary romance novel. Book number 1 in the Calistini Crown series, Harlequin Desire number 1942. This was originally published in 2009. Average rating of 4.17 stars on Goodreads. I only gave it 2.5 stars. So obviously a lot of people do really enjoy this book. And I think the reason that I didn't like it had nothing to do with the book itself. It was, you know, it had nothing to do with the writing style and all those things. It's just not my type of a romance. And I think that's why I didn't love it. But obviously it is for a lot of people, and I'm not knocking anybody who would like this. I mean, each to their own, you know. I'm not a fan of paranormal, but a lot of people really like paranormal. I wouldn't knock people for that, you know, or same as I wouldn't feel that I would want people to look down their noses at me for preferring contemporaries, you know, or second chance romance, or whatever the case may be. So I read this one for my 40 Years of Harlequin project. This was my 2009 book, and I am glad that I read it, because the more of these books that I read, the more I realize that these aren't my forte. My biggest thing is that I felt that there was no major plot to this book, and what little plot there was, it didn't move very quickly. This was very much an alpha male type of a story. So in this story, our characters are Phoebe and Leonardo, and he is potentially crown prince of this small, you know, fake Mediterranean European country. And he kind of walked away from all of that, you know, many, many years ago. And Phoebe, who works for public relations for this small country, she has been sent to New York to convince him to come back because they need him to be king, because the current king is very ill. He suffered a couple strokes and he's just not up to ruling this country anymore. So they need to get another king. And this isn't, the kingship doesn't fall to the heir, essentially. It's almost like a presidential kind of a race in a way, where, you know, the king and, you know, the people who work for the palace vote on a person, but it's not decided via, you know, an heir system. So it was just pretty much the two of them rehashing this relationship they had had years ago, before he went away and before he decided to leave the country. And it just, that was the entire plot, is that she's trying to get him to come back, and not much happened, in my opinion. I'm not a fan of the alpha male trope. I know a lot of people are, so if you are, definitely check this one out, because I'm sure you will love it. But they just kind of annoy me in a way. So yeah, didn't love it. Glad I read it though, and yeah, so there's that one. The next one that I finished was California Girls by Ann M. Martin. This is a middle grade fiction novel. It is Babysitter's Club Super Special number 5, published originally in 1990, average rating of 3.82 stars on Goodreads. I gave this one 3.5 stars. This one was cute and fun. I do like the super specials. I've mentioned that before. In this one, the babysitters end up buying lottery tickets, and they end up winning a $10,000 prize. So obviously one of their parents cashes the ticket in for them. And then they take the money and they split it up amongst the 7 of them, and they decide to use it, excuse me, I've got the hiccups, to go and visit Dawn's dad and brother in California for 2 weeks, and spend 2 weeks in California. So, you know, that part of it was really fun. I thought it was a great a fantasy aspect, if you want to use that terminology. I mean, to a 12 or 13-year-old who would be reading this, I mean, can you imagine winning that kind of money in the lottery? That's a huge amount of money. And then getting to go off to California for a week. So, of course, each of the babysitters all have different adventures. Christy's dealing with the We Love Kids Club, which is the babysitters club that was started in California after Dawn talked so much about the babysitters club. And Christy, of course, believes that she's a much more superior babysitter and that the babysitters club is far better. You know, Marianne, much like she ends up doing later in the next super special, which is New York, New York, where she's like playing tour guide kind of an idea. Stacy ends up, you know, falling in with this crowd of surfers, like, who are slightly older, who are a little bit more wild. And, you know, Dawn's dealing with her father's new girlfriend. Jessie tries to get into a Hollywood movie, you know, and Mallery wants to be a California girl. So she wants to, like, you know, dye her hair blonde and get rid of her freckles and wear all this makeup. Oh, and Claudia has a romance with a boy who's very, very smart, and she doesn't feel like she kind of lives up to him. So, yeah, I mean, it was fun. There's a lot going on in this book. And because there's so much going on, you really don't get to delve too much into each individual plot line for each babysitter. But I do enjoy these ones. I think they're a lot of fun. They're all told in each different perspective of each different babysitter. And yeah, I enjoyed it. It was a fun read, and, you know, I'm, again, glad I'm reading through this series. The next book that I finished was Sisters Like Us by Susan Mallery. This is a chick lit women's fiction novel. Book number 4, the 4th and final book in the Mischief Bay series, so yay to finishing another series. This was narrated on audio by Tanya Eby. Published originally in 2018, average rating of 4.05 stars on Goodreads. I gave this one 3.5 stars. Did not love this one. Not the best in the series, in my opinion. This one, except for one character who appeared in a previous book, this, in my opinion, has nothing to do with the first 3 books in the series. The first 3 books followed, like, almost the same group of friends, whereas this one, it's one of the guys that one of the women in the previous book knew, and it's him, and then these other 2 women, but the bulk of the story is about these 2 sisters named Harper and Stacy. And they are both older, and which is one thing I did appreciate. These were not 20-somethings. These were both women in their 40s. And Harper is recently divorced. She has a 16-year-old daughter, and she's trying to kind of make it on her own. Her ex-husband is mostly absent in her daughter's life, which is, I hate reading about that, but unfortunately it can be the reality for some couples. And she's trying to make ends meet. She's running her own business. And then Stacy is the younger sister by a few years. and she is just now pregnant with her first child, and she's afraid to tell her mother because her mother at one time when she was young told her that she wasn't normal, she wasn't like other girls, that she didn't have that instinct to be a mom and to want to do these homemaking things. And her mother, the girl's mother, whose name is Bunny, she absolutely prides herself on this, and the mother made me so angry throughout this entire book. Just, she played a martyr through a lot of the book, like, oh, woe is me, my girls don't love me, they don't want to do what I tell them to do. These are women in their 40s, like, you know, get a clue kind of an idea. But anyway, the mother has always said that the women's place is in the home, and has even told Harper that if she just was nicer to her husband, he wouldn't have left her. Like, really? Your mom's supposed to be on your side, you know, depending on the situation with your divorce. But most of the time, your own parent should be on your side, not on your husband's side. You know, the mother's belief is that the father always, or the husband, or the man always comes first, and that you need to take care of him, like, to the point where Harper spends her entire life, like her entire adult life, you know, if it's an event, for example, at the beginning of this book, it's Easter. She has to pick the right color tablecloth and the right place settings to go with it, and the menu has to be planned out, to the fact that she goes outside and does chalk drawings on the ground of bunny prints for her daughter. Her daughter is 16. She's not 8. You know, like, but this is the way the mother thinks. Nothing can be bought from a store. Like, no food stuff is bought from a store. If Harper's making macaroni and cheese, she makes, to the point, her own noodles. You know, like, it's a little ridiculous, and she's trying to do all of this still, along with running this business that she does, you know, to help people, like, kind of a planner of sorts. And then there's Stacy, who cannot live up to her sister. She is an academic. She is, the job that she does, she's a scientist, and she works trying to find a cure for MS, which is, you know, amazing. And her mother, like Bunny, is just like, well, you know, now you need to just deal with children. You know, you got married, where's the children? Who cares about your job? That's not important. It's all about the family. And yes, your family is very, very important. But if you do a job that you truly love, you shouldn't have to sacrifice one for the other. And, you know, the mother's obviously very, very old-fashioned in her thinking. So yeah, the mother drove me crazy in this book, and that's kind of what kept it from a 4-star for me. And Lucas, who's the character from book 3, he is Harper's love interest in this book. So that's kind of the tie for this one. But again, this book is nowhere near as good as the first 3 books. The Girls of Mischief Bay, The Friends We Keep, and I think A Million Little Things was the 3rd book. They were fantastic, and I recommend those. I don't like telling people that you can skip a book in a series. This is the last book. I think I got it. I don't think it was part of the Audible Romance package, but I'm pretty sure I grabbed it on Overdrive from my library. So if you have a copy, then go ahead and read it. But if you don't, see if you can borrow it from your library. Because, yeah, like I said, the mother really, really drove me crazy in this one. The next book that I finished was a Tyranny of Petticoats. I don't know if I'm ever saying that word right. This is a historical fiction novel. It was edited by Jessica Spotswood. So this is an anthology by 15 different YA authors, female YA authors. This was originally published in 2016. Average rating on Goodreads of 3.75 stars. This one I gave 3.5 stars. For my summer romance book bingo, this was for the LGBTQ romance, and there were 2 stories in here that featured LGBTQ characters. So it did absolutely fit for that prompt. So 15 stories in here. I did mention I did my long weekend vlog last week, and I was reading this at the time. And I was stating how the first few stories tended to be a little bit more magical realism. And it's even labeled as such on Goodreads in the tags, like on the main tags on the main page, as magical realism. But after those first couple stories, that stopped. And it was all just strict historical fiction. And that made me super happy. So a good bulk of these stories got at least a 3.5 to even a 4-star. 2 books stood out at getting 4.5-star ratings. They were the 2 highest rated stories in this book. I'm not going to talk about every story in here, but I do want to highlight the 2 that I really, really loved, because I think that they both deserve a mention. And the first one was The Red Raven Ball by Carolyn Tongue Richmond. And this one was about, it took place just after the Civil War in Washington, or no, during the Civil War in Washington. And it's about a girl whose grandmother is trying to marry her off. Which was what was done at the time, you know, and she had received a letter from her uncle who's serving in the army about trying to hunt out a Confederate spy. And he's asked her to look for this person at this grand ball, this Red Raven Ball that her grandmother is hosting. So during the course of the story, it just takes place over the ball. she is looking for this person, and it, you know, I don't want to give a spoiler away, but there's a fun little twist at the end. And then at the end of the story, she ends up taking off and leaving, like running away essentially. And what I really wanted was a continuation of that. I would love that to have been like the prologue to a full-length novel of this girl, because she was heading off to find her uncle. Again, serving for, you know, it would have been the Union Army, right? The Union and the Confederates. So he was fighting for the North. And to find him and to, you know, what happened next? What was the next part of her story? And, you know, a part of me was a little bit disappointed because I'm like, I want to read more. So I'm going to have to look up the author and see, because I would be so curious if she did continue on the story, because it was really, really good. And the other one was The Legendary Garrett Girls, and this was by Y.S. Lee. And this one took place in Alaska during the Alaskan Gold Rush. And it was about two girls who, you know, I think that they were, like, this is supposed to be YA, but I think that they were probably about 18 or 19 years old. And they were running a saloon in Alaska, in this town in Alaska. And one day they end up getting this man by the name of Soapy Smith, who's an actual historical figure. Look him up. He's got a varied history. He was killed in a shootout. He was a pretty bad guy. Like, for the time period, he was probably like a mobster of sorts. And he just came into this bar and he's like, I'm taking it. There's nothing you can do or say. I'm taking the bar. So the older sister kind of worked out something with him and is like, give us 2 weeks. And, you know, then we'll hand over it lock, stock, and barrel, but let us make enough money in the next 2 weeks to be able to leave and, you know, maybe set up shops in another town somewhere else, because, you know. So then they devised this plan to kind of get back at him, and it was delightful. It was so much fun. You know, again, I would like to read more about the adventures of these two Garrett sisters, because they were just, it was delightful. You know, there were so many good stories in this book. Once I got past the first couple, I think it was like the first one and like the fifth one, that were more magical realism that I had no interest in. The rest of them were all true historical novel, like historical short stories. You know, they took place in such a wide range of areas. A couple took place during the Civil War. You know, one took place during World War II. That was one of the LGBTQ stories. A relationship with two girls who work making planes in California. And, you know, one with the civil rights movement. This was really good. I mean, yes, it only got 3.5 stars, but unfortunately there were a couple stories that only got 3 stars. So what I did was I took my rating. If you're interested to see what my ratings were for each individual story, I'll leave a link to my Goodreads page in the description box below, so you can go ahead and see what I rated each individual story. But overall, like, it rounded to about, so I gave each story a rating and then divided that by 15, because there were 15 stories, and then that's how I got the 3.5. It's actually a little bit higher, but it wasn't quite a 4-star. So yeah, really, really good. But those two stories were definitely my favorite in the series, or in the book, excuse me. The next one that I finished was One More Promise by Samantha Chase. This is a contemporary romance novel. It is book number 2 in the Band on the Run series. This was narrated on audio by Christopher Kipanik and Julia Moika. Published in 2018, average rating of 4.15 stars on Goodreads. I gave this one 3.5 stars. This was okay. It was a fun contemporary romance, really spicy. It's about a guy. It's, like I said, the second book in the Band on the Run series. This is one that I read for the meet and greet challenge for August and September of this year. This book was picked for me by another member to read. As I mentioned for that challenge, I'm trying to read through a lot of the series I have. So super excited to get this second book done. And our main characters are named Paige and Dylan. And Dylan is a member of the band. He plays bass. And he really lived up to the rock lifestyle, excuse me. He drank and slept with different women, and at the beginning of the book, he's just getting out of rehab, of 3 months in rehab for alcohol. And he was actually in a drunk driving accident. Nobody was killed, thankfully, but he's kind of got this attitude, or not this attitude, but this is hanging over his head. This is who he is. This is who the public thinks that he is this bad boy rock star who drinks too much and gets into car accidents, kind of an idea. So anyway, Paige works for a public relations firm that's actually owned by her father. And she's starting a new campaign, a literacy campaign. And she is trying to her goal is to get all these famous authors to start talking about, you know, different things. And then her sister, who's a little bit older than her, but not so business-minded, her father's like, oh, let your sister help you out. So the sister kind of takes over and starts calling all these rock stars and stuff and being like, these people are much more interesting than authors. And, you know, call these people. And Dylan is one of those people. But little known to Paige is that he actually has a learning disability with reading, but he does enjoy reading, and he just had, like, growing up in school, having a bit more of a difficult time with it. And I really, really like that aspect of it. The problem was that that never came up again. That it wasn't until much later that that came back up again, and she kind of found that out. So Dylan and Paige butt heads throughout the whole book, most of the book anyway. So it is an enemies to lovers kind of a story in a way. It was enjoyable. It was spicy. It was a typical contemporary. You know, the band aspect of it is really fun. There's one more book in this series that I still need to read, so hopefully I'll get to that one, you know, sometime soon, so I can get this one finished as well. Samantha Chase is a good writer. She writes a lot of great characters, fun plots, and I really like the dynamic and how Paige learned to stand up for herself against not only her sister but also her father, both of which, you know, really took advantage of her. And I'm glad to see that she did end up, like, you know, being able to stand up to them at the end. So that was really great. So yeah, this was a really fun one. And the last one that I finished this week was Tangled Threat by Heather Graham. This is a contemporary, well, no, it's not. It's a romantic suspense novel. Harlequin Intrigue number 1875. This is brand new. It is coming out on the 20th of August, so it hasn't been published just yet. Average rating of 3.76 stars on Goodreads. I gave this one 4 stars. And I want to thank NetGalley and Harlequin for sending me this book to review. So yeah, I really like this one, but I am biased in a way because I love Heather Graham, and you guys know that. This one was not a paranormal romance in that aspect. It was definitely a more romantic suspense, although it did have some slightly perhaps more paranormal aspects in it, with the fact of this haunted tree of all things, called the History Tree. And this book takes place in Florida, not far from Jacksonville. And what I loved about this is there was so much Florida history weaved into this story. I mean, true Florida history. The whole thing about the History Tree isn't real. That's made up by the author. But the premise of this story is about these two people named Mara and Brock. And they knew each other 12 years ago when they were teenagers. And they worked at this resort where this History Tree is located. And they worked there for the summer, and they both kind of gave tours of, like, ghost story tours involving the tree and the history of the tree, and people have been murdered there, and all these kind of things. There's ghosts walking the property and all these. And then when the book opens up 12 years ago, a woman is killed and hung from that tree. And then it flashes forward to present day, to 12 years later in the present day. And Brock is now an FBI agent, and Mara is back because she now works for a camera crew for a woman who, I think it's her YouTube, like, this woman has a YouTube channel where she talks about different ghosts and sightings and things like that, and which I think would be super awesome. So if anybody knows of any actual YouTube channels like that, please do let me know, because that kind of thing totally interests me. So anyway, Mara and Brock are brought back together. They hadn't seen each other since that night, even though that they were in a relationship back then. And the story goes from there, that they're trying to find these other missing people. And that's why Brock is here, is because there are these missing women. And of course, the case from 12 years ago is coming back up. Really, really good. Like I said, this is so steeped in Florida history. It's fantastic. That's the one thing I love about Heather Graham. I think not only is her writing great and her characters are great, she also does write under the name Shannon Drake. She does write, or used to write, historical romances, and she's so good at it. She's so good at the history of these different locations. The Crew of Hunters series does this as well, with all the different historical locations, but I just adore her work. I thought this book was super, super interesting. Like I said, a touch of the paranormal, but I really wouldn't call it paranormal. This is definitely more of a romantic suspense. It is a standalone book, so if you are looking to try out Heather Graham and you haven't tried out her work, this is definitely, like I said, one to pick up. Comes out at the end of August. I believe it's already available for sale on the harlequin.com website, but will be available for the Kindle on the 20th of August. So definitely check that one out. So anyway, guys, that is all that I have for this video. I do hope that you enjoyed it. Please let me know in the comments below if you've read any of these books and what you thought about it, or thought about them, I should say. And until my next video, everybody, take care and happy reading. Thank you all so much for watching. Bye, guys.